So it is official now. The Cowboys are not paying Tyron Smith. He's gone to the New York Jets. And tonight, we'll talk about why Tyron Smith's contract details really tell us the whole story and how the Cowboys, well, in my opinion, they did him wrong and they messed up. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Prime Time. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central here on Dallas On Demand Sports Talk Network. With a lot more content coming your way, make sure that you check out atcsports.com/Dallas. And as always, do me a favor and hit the like button for me if you enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, on a Sunday night. It is a great night to talk some Cowboys football, and we did have some big news over the weekend, and that was because on Friday evening, we heard the news. And it was a little bit cruel because I'll tell you this, during the NFL scouting combine, the hopes of retaining Tyron Smith were shot down immediately by reports of Ian Rappaport from Ian Rappaport from NFL Network, basically saying that Smith was not coming back to Dallas for another year. And then the days went by, almost a full week of free agency went by, and we started thinking, wait a minute, these tackles are not signing yet. These tackles are still available in the market. Could it be that the Cowboys actually nailed this one? Could it be that the Cowboys actually figured out that Tyron Smith was not going to get a massive deal out there in free agency? Forget about the word massive, a better deal than what they were offering. And we started getting some, a silver lining of hope. And then all of that went to the garbage can on Friday evening when it was reported that Tyron Smith is going to the New York Jets. Ironically, he's going to be protecting Aaron Rodgers' blind side, and that is, another blow from the former rival to the Cowboys. So there is that. But tonight I want to talk about that deal getting done and basically why I believe the Cowboys should have done or should have made that deal, and why I think the Cowboys look bad for letting number 77 walk in free agency. And in addition to that, why I think they did him wrong. But before we do any of that, though, let me say hi very quickly in the chat. We've got Toxic Tom, we've got Katharina, we've got Gregory in here as well. We've got Joe Gonzalez. Who else do we have around here? We've got a lot of people joining the show right now. We've got Holly, Andrew. Thank you for joining the show. Daniel, also in the chat. We've got Stephen White, Ricky. Shout out to all of you for joining the show. I think this is the perfect way to get us started. Marquez here says, 1 year, $20 million. There's no way they were going to pay that. Talking about the Cowboys, they're paying Tyron Smith. I think that is the perfect way to start this off because I think that number is extremely misleading. And of course, it is the initial number that is being thrown around in media because that's how it was reported. A 1 year deal worth up to, keywords, up to $20 million. And, if that was really the case, like exactly, we would be like, if it really was a $20 million deal, even I would be like, okay, I get not wanting to pay Tyron Smith that kind of money. The problem is that's not the reality of the Tyron Smith deal with the New York Jets. Here's how it's built, according to reports from Mike Florio, PFT, who has been first on the details there. They're still not fully released, so we don't know all about this contract for Tyron Smith, but this is what we do know. Out of those $20 million, only $6.5 million is guaranteed. That means $13.5 million out of that contract is going to be earned either through playing time incentives or other incentives, according to the PFT report. Now, we still don't know what those incentives are, but what that means is that that cap hit is not going to be anywhere close to $20 million. I'm not sure it's going to hit $10 million dollars for the 2024 season for a second team All Pro tackle that played 14 games in the NFL in 2023. Now, here's more or less what you should know about the incentives and the deal and all that. And again, I will basically say this up front. We don't know what the incentives are. We don't know how they're broken down. We don't know how they're set up. But chances are it is going to be sort of like a 5% lather, like what the Cowboys set up last year, where if Tyron Smith played 50% of the snaps, he was going to get $1 million and then another million for 55 and then another million for 60, another for 65, all the way up to 90%. That means, based on the fact that Tyron Smith played 70% of the snaps last year, that means that Tyron Smith is going to count towards the cap, whatever the, signing bonus and salary structure is, which I do believe chances are the Jets are building this into like a 2-year deal where 1 year voids, and that way they can spread out the cap hit for the signing bonus, because that's how teams work around that. So I would assume that year one cap hit is going to be somewhere around, honestly, maybe what, $6 million, something like that. Because when you look at the incentives, a lot of people will ask, how do those count towards the salary cap? They are divided into two groups. One group of incentives is likely to be earned, and then there's another group of incentives that is not likely to be earned. Now, there is not a subjective committee of people who determines what is likely and what is not likely. The way that those are determined is by asking, did the player achieve this or that last year? So, for example, Tyron did get to 50% of the snaps. He did get to 55 and 60 and 65 and 70. So all of those are likely to be earned because he just did that last year. And that's how the rules work. The rest of them, including the snap count thresholds from 75 to 90, plus the playoff incentives, because Tyron had a group of incentives that was basically, if you played this amount of snaps and you get a playoff win, then it's another $500,000. And then 2 playoff wins, it's another $500,000. And that all the way through the Super Bowl, that was $2 million that Tyron Smith was eligible for in the postseason. Those are obviously not likely to be earned because he did not win a playoff game. The Cowboys did not win a playoff game as a team. So that means that all of those incentives wouldn't have counted towards the cap, just a group of them, a small group of them, somewhere along $4, $5, $6 million, depending on, somewhere around $6 million, based on the fact that he got to 70%. Now, if he does hit the other incentives, they do charge you for them in the salary cap, but that doesn't happen until 2025. What I'm trying to say here, even though we don't know yet what the cap hit is going to be for Tyron Smith, it is clearly going to be low enough to where we can look at what the cap hit is for Tyron for the Cowboys in 2024 and laugh about this whole thing. Because Tyron Smith is going to account for $6 million in dead money for the Cowboys. So is Ezekiel Elliott, by the way. So the same team that is trying to convince us that, hey, we cannot make this work because of the salary cap is paying those two guys over $10 million for not playing in Dallas in 2024. Now, when I say paying, I don't mean taking cash out of their bag and giving it to them. I mean just salary cap wise. Tyron and Zeke are going to combine for over $12 million in that money in 2024. But despite those numbers, the Cowboys are still going to sit here and be like, well, nobody thinks highly, higher than we do about Tyron than in this organization, because that's what Stephen Jones said earlier in the week, only for the Jets to prove that, no, actually, we do value him higher because we're giving him a better contract that Tyron did decide to sign, which is insane to think about. I really get all of the concerns about Tyron's health. I do get people who are taking the route of, he gets injured way too often. didn't get injured a whole lot in 2023, so it's bound to happen in 2024. Like, I sort of understand that logic, but there are a couple of flaws with that logic, in my opinion. Number one is we're not talking about a $20 million cap hit or anything like that. We're talking about a very manageable cap hit that I will be surprised if it hits $10 million for the Jets in 2024. I think it's much likelier to be somewhere around $7 million or $6 million, even if not less, because the Jets can be creative with it. They can spread out the cap hit for the signing bonus, plus what I just mentioned about the incentives. Like, they can work around it in several ways. So that's one big flaw. We're not talking about paying somebody an insane amount of money that will keep you from doing whatever else you want to do on the offensive line. And then flaw number two, it's not like the Cowboys have a plan. It's just not. Even, and listen, I hate the Amari Cooper decision. I absolutely despise the Amari Cooper decision a couple years ago. You guys know about this. I still think about that even to this day in 2024. But at least you had CeeDee Lamb in place to be your next number one wide receiver, right? The Cowboys kinda, if they need to, have a left tackle to replace Tyron with, and I'm talking about Tyler Smith, but I would absolutely bet that they prefer to leave him at left guard. That's the thing that really bothers me about the Tyron Smith thing, is that I don't think they have a plan at offensive line, at least a very solid plan. They don't. Because drafting somebody at 24th overall when you don't really know who's making it to 24 is not really a solid plan, if we're being honest with ourselves. And the fact that it's going to take you until the end of April to know what you're going to be doing with Tyler Smith is something that I am not a fan of at all. So having said that, Tyron Smith heads to the New York Jets. And I'll say this, on top of all of what we've just talked about, all of the financials, and on top of all of the football reasons why you would have to be interested in bringing back Tyron Smith, and, those reasons are the fact that he's still pretty damn good. Top 5 in just about every stat for tackles last year. Second team All-Pro, still got it. On top of all of that, I do think they do him wrong with this decision. I do think there are few players that have been extremely classy with the team, and Tyron Smith is one of them. He signed an insanely long-term contract early on in his career. Never gave the team any trouble for that. Never did you see Tyron Smith being, all problematic with such a deal that you don't see in the NFL for a reason. You don't see those 10-year deals or 8-year deals a whole lot in the NFL because they're not favorable for players. But Tyron Smith signed it and never said a word. Now, later on, they asked him, you know what? You need to rework your deal. You need to bring down what we're paying you. And he agreed to that. And yet, the Cowboys, when it was their turn to return the favor, and not even favor because the guy earned it, they were not up to the task. They were not up to the task. That is the thing right there. Rich says, looks like they're going to be waiting for teams to be cutting players after camp and use the Gallup money, says Rich. And more likely than not, that's also going to help them with the salary cap stuff, with the contract extension stuff, right? Let's see here. Gary says, does anyone know if Tyron's agent reached out to the Cowboys? We know that they met at the NFL scouting combine. And after that, it was when Ian Rappaport from NFL Network reported that Tyron wasn't likely to head back. Likely because Stephen Jones and the Cowboys entered that meeting room with the same deal that Tyron Smith played for in 2023. And despite the bounce back, despite the second team All-Pro year and all that, they decided he was not worth more money than that. Like, I assure you that was pretty much the same deal. Toxic Tom, and that's another thing that I think Cowboys fans are ignoring. Do you think this was the Cowboys being like, Tyron, we don't want to pay you because we already have a plan in place, and this is where, This is where we part ways. This is where we say goodbye because this is the way that we envisioned it. Do you really think that's what happened this offseason with Tyron Smith? Or do you think it's that when they got in that room at the NFL scouting combine, they really thought Tyron Smith was going to go for that sort of deal, only to find out, no, Tyron had improved his stock significantly. And how can you not think that after a second team All Pro year when you reworked his deal because he had missed a lot of games the year prior to that in 2022? It makes no sense. So I think that's another thing that I understand. Again, I understand being like, he gets injured too often. I'm glad he's not coming back. I understand that point of view, but at least you got to admit, hey, this wasn't the way that the Cowboys wanted this to play out. Pretty convinced about that. Toxic says, Mo, loyalty only extends the length of a dollar bill. Tyron took a discount his whole career, and they did what with it? Nothing. F the Jones. TC915 says, Tyron has always been a professional. I have nothing but respect for number 77. Man, it's one of those guys that I think Cowboys Nation in general is going to perceive a little bit like fans perceive the Marquez Ware, right? Like, if the Jets go a long way in the playoffs, I think Cowboys fans are going to be happy about Tyron Smith being in those sort of situations. Let's see here. Let's see what you guys have to say about this. Staying healthy played a major part, says Lee Todd King. And yeah, like, I understand the injury concerns, but can we at least acknowledge that this guy played 14 games under a new practice regime? Can we acknowledge that that is a factor? So I agree with King right there. Kevin says Tyron Smith will retire after one season in Jets land, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case indeed, right? Shout out to Al, by the way, who is opening up a parenthesis here very quickly to mention that Jacina Anderson reported that Al Harris is being promoted to assistant head coach. Well deserved. That gives us 2 extra 3-round picks this year and next year for hiring a minority in an upper level position in organizations. Says Al. I'm not sure. You might be right, Al, but I'll be honest right here and I'll say I'm not exactly sure that's how it's gonna play out because I'm not sure assistant head coach will I'm being honest. Like, I'm not sure it works that way. You might be right, but I would like to make sure before I confirm what you're saying right now, because as I said, I'm not sure. TC915 says, man, F the Jones for real. I can't stand them fools. So where does that leave? Where does that leave the Cowboys offensive line going into 2024? I think there are several options and combinations. And combinations are weird because it largely depends on what you do with Tyler Smith. So let's run the scenarios here. If you keep Tyler at left guard, which I'll be honest, I think that's what the Cowboys ideally prefer. I think the Cowboys thought they wanted Tyler Smith to play left tackle, but they're not at a point where they're like, damn, this kid is good at guard, like really, really great, All Pro caliber, great. We wish he could stay there. I think that's where the Cowboys are at right now. The problem is you're not finding your left tackle in free agency. In other words, if you want to replace Tyron Smith, you're going to have to wait until the NFL draft to know who you're doing it with. And maybe you're going to be wiped out at tackle when the moment comes, and then you just don't know where you're going to be at either. So we know that so far. So let's leave Tyler for now at left guard, and then I'll just fill in the blanks here very quickly. In right guard, Zach Martin, and Terrence Steele is our right tackle. We need to figure out who is our left tackle and who is our center. Likely, your tackle is going to be somebody you find at 24th in this scenario in the NFL draft. So I'm not sure if that's the enormous, gigantic Amarius Mims. I'm not sure if that is Tyler Guyton. I'm not sure if it's somebody else, if somebody like Troy Fautano and you want him to play tackle, I don't know if he's that, but it's likely the best path the Cowboys could take as long as he's there. Now, center is not precisely fun because center, you could talk about Hoffman. You could talk about TJ Bass if they get him to learn how to snap a football, because both of these were not terrible when they had to play for the Cowboys in 2023. Now, I have a tough time thinking that Hoffman or Bass are going to be upgrades over Tyler Biadasz at center, but that's where we are at right now. Could the Cowboys draft somebody in round 2, in round 3 of the NFL draft to play center? Sure. Or if Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon drops to 24th, then by all means, he would be a good idea. And then now you got to figure out who plays left tackle, right? Because it would have to be Tyler Smith in that scenario, and maybe Hoffman and Bass taking over left guard if it comes to that. So that's one possibility again, and that would be a first-round rookie at left tackle, Tyler Smith at left guard, Hoffman / Bass at center, or / another guy in that's picked later in the NFL draft, assuming JPJ isn't available at 24th, or that you took a tackle, and then Martin and Steele on the right side. Now, the other scenario is if you do move Tyler Smith to left tackle. So how does that look like? You move Tyler Smith to tackle. You have a hole at left guard, another at center, and 70 and 78 on the right side of things. So now this is pretty much the same thing, but flipped. We're now not really talking about a Hoffman and Bass at center alone. We're talking about those two guys at center. And you're probably talking about a left guard in round 1. So that is where you get to talk about Graham Barton. You get to talk about Troy Fautano, but having him play guard instead of tackle, even though he did mention with 34-plus inch arms at the combine, which could mean he can play tackle if needed to. So I would guess round 1 left guard in that scenario if you're pushing Tyler Smith to the outside, and then a center, which is going to be Hoffman, Bass, or a later picked offensive lineman in the NFL draft. Either two of those scenarios and the scenarios within the scenarios are, in my opinion, significant downgrades from last year. It's not going to be a better offensive line, in my opinion, in 2024 than it was in 2023, which is not exactly promising given that this was no longer that top 3 offensive line in the NFL. The Cowboys were actually pretty inconsistent up front, mostly in the run game, but also in the pass blocking game, especially when injuries took place and the Cowboys had to fill in for Tyron Smith or, at other points, Tyler. It was a whole thing on the offensive line. Now, there are some wild cards, and I see you guys mentioning some of them in the chat, right? Chris Graham mentions Asim Richards. Somebody mentions, what about Waletzko, right? The Cowboys do have all of those guys that some way, somehow could also end up with a starting position with the Cowboys. Now, my opinion, the problem is with those guys, you cannot count with them for such a role until you get to training camp. So these are the sort of guys that if they start playing lights out in training camp, you start considering them for bigger roles. But I'm not sure the Cowboys can have enough information on them when you're not seeing them play or you're not seeing them practice fully equipped at this stage of the year. And even during the season, like the focus of the coaches is not there, right? The coaches of this team, the main coaches, are not focused on how Asim Richards is doing in practice. They're focused on getting the wins that weekend. They're focused on the guys that are actually going to play. So how can you factor in guys like Asim and guys like, who else did we mention? Oh, Matt Waletzko, right now, and how can they impact your decision making right now if you just don't know enough about them? That's more or less where I'm at. All of those, sure, they can end up being nice surprises, but I'm not sure you bet on them, though. I don't think you do. Let's see what you guys have to say, though, in the chat. Shout out to Oscar Herrera, who says, how do you know it's not going to be better? Fans are so afraid to move on and find out. It could be better. You do know. Oh, it could absolutely be better. But do we want to get into the chances of somebody being better? Like, I understand, Oscar, but in that world where I could also say, well, it could be 1,000 times worse and the Cowboys could be an 0-17 team in 2024. You don't know, do you? It's the same argument, but backwards. I think just doing the job here and breaking it all down, yeah, I think an offense that is losing a future Hall of Famer, second team All Pro from last year, not somebody that won All Pro 5 years ago or 3 years ago. Yeah, I think it's tough to find a left tackle at 24th overall who is going to be better than that in his first year in the league. Now, can the Cowboys find somebody that they ultimately develop into a great player? Sure. They've actually been pretty damn good at finding offensive linemen in the NFL draft. But, any given Sunday, anybody can beat anybody, but we all know who the favorites are, right? We don't know anything. That's why we love sports. But that doesn't mean us breaking it down and taking an objective look at things and being like, hey, the Cowboys are taking a step backwards in the offensive line isn't fair. Toxic says, Mo, and cashing in your 401k and putting it into a roulette table could make you money. Doesn't mean that it's smart. That's a better way of putting it, too, from Toxic, for sure. Gotta says, name the last time he played a whole season. Says Gotta Love. Tyron Smith, 2015. Tyron Smith was 2015. That's why I established it very early in this show. We're not talking about a $20 million deal. Like, I'm talking about Tyron Smith being worth what the Jets are paying him with the risk of him losing games. Nobody is acting like Tyron Smith is going to end up playing a full season in 2024. That's important. But I understand, like, that's the big counter or the big con for re-signing Tyron Smith, for having that discussion. I do understand that's a big con for him, though. Now, moving on from the offensive line talk, which we'll keep discussing a whole lot, I assume, from here on until the NFL draft. The Cowboys did make a couple of additional moves this weekend. The Cowboys cut Michael Gallup and they cut Leighton Vander Esch. Now, two players that were moved on from in very, very different contexts. Number one, Michael Gallup. He's cut because he was benched, right? And it's not a surprise to anybody that he's being cut. He was cut after 2023 season, where in week 9, he was essentially benched by Jalen Tolbert. And mind you, he continued to play a significant role on offense, but he only averaged 42% of the snap count after week 9. So you start thinking about that, and you start thinking about the fact that he was going to make $8.5 million in salary in 2024. And we all could see from a mile away that Michael Gallup was not going to be a Dallas Cowboy in 2024, unless maybe he took like a huge pay cut. Like, that was the only way that I could see Michael Gallup sticking around for another year. They granted him a permission to seek a trade, which is why this took a long time to develop this way. Obviously, and I say obviously because I really do think nobody thought a trade was going to take place for Michael Gallup. He didn't find a trade partner, so now he's released. But a key detail of this is that it's a post-June 1st release, which means the Cowboys do not get the cap relief now. They get the cap relief until June, and that doesn't allow them to, have that cap space right now for free agency, but it might benefit them for other stuff like contract extensions down the road. So there's that. Michael Gallup was never going to be paid $8.5 million by the Cowboys with the way that his seasons have been turning out. as of late. And then there's another player cut on a very different perspective and circumstance, and that's Leighton Vander Esch. He's cut with a failed physical designation, which means, Vander Esch, all signs point towards retirement so far. Could he surprise us, or could he force himself to play another year? You never know with these guys, but it does seem like signs are pointing towards a Leighton Vander Esch retirement. And, all that I can say about Vander Esch is that I think it sucks, like the whole situation about his career coming to an end through injuries. I also don't think it's a major loss for Dallas. Sure, he was the starter of the team at the beginning of the year in 2023. And more than anything, he was your green dot guy. He was your communicator on defense. I think the Cowboys do lose somebody that was a good guy in the locker room. And I do think it sucks for his career to end this way. But I think the Cowboys can overcome such a loss later in the year. And I think Eric Kendricks is a great addition to that. For as much as I'm criticizing the Cowboys for what I believe they ought to be criticized, as I've said since last week, I do think Eric Kendricks is a good addition to the Cowboys. So I'm excited about that one. I think he can come in. He already knows Mike Zimmer's defense, so I don't see a problem with him wearing the green dot in 2024, because I do think he should be expected to start. Let's see here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see here. Gallup was cut for draftees contract coming up, says Kevin. I think Michael Gallup was cut because the Cowboys did not want to pay him $8.5 million in salary, which I'm fine with. By the way, you were not getting the right return on investment on that. So I'm fine with the Cowboys cutting Michael Gallup, but I'm sure, the Cowboys are going to be fine with the draftee money. Toxic says, Mo, I bet had he passed that physical, he would be back, says Toxic. It's interesting to think about. You might not be wrong, Toxic, but I also think this was pretty expected that he was not going to pass that physical. And that's why I think since November of last year, Jerry Jones was telling 105.3 The Fan that, hey, you know what? Vander Esch needs to decide if he wants to keep playing. So I think for a good while now, we've been expecting Leighton Vander Esch to hang it up. So right now, just for you guys, if you want a quick recap of where we are at, talking about the Cowboys free agency so far. So unrestricted free agents that are re-signing with the team. You've got CJ Goodwin, Jordan Lewis, and Trent Sieg. Signing elsewhere, you've got Tyron Smith going to the Jets, Tony Pollard going to the Titans, Armstrong going to the Commanders, with Biadish, with Fowler, with Noah Igbenogin, who we heard about today, and then Neville Gallimore headed to the Dolphins. Players that we still don't know where they're going to end up. You've got Stephon Gilmore, and I have some thoughts on that. Maybe tomorrow we can go over them. Jaron Kears, Jonathan Hankins, who is reportedly garnering some interest from the Seahawks. So Hankins might not be automatic after all. Chuma Edoga, Rico Dowdle, which I'm really intrigued by too, and Sean McKeon. Now, outside signings, the Cowboys get Eric Kendricks, and that's pretty much where we are at right now. Damn, that's the only one. That's crazy. Eric Kendricks is a lone outside signing. All right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central. We'll talk more about the Dallas Cowboys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Hit the like button for me if you enjoyed the show. It helps us put this show in front of more and more people. Shout out to Rico Jones in the chat. Shout out to Chris. Shout out to William, Johnny, Isidro, all of you who I didn't mention before. Shout out to all of you. Thank you for joining the show. And I'll see you tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central. Bye-bye.